This is the Governance, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting of the Strategic Housing Finance Corporation. Let me call the meeting to order. I'm sorry I was a little late. The first item on our agenda is public comment. We have people signed up to speak.
So we have a couple, as I understand it, folks who were attempting to join and having a little bit of difficulty. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Sade, Getha, and I think Linda.
Yeah, Linda.
Okay.
Ms. Sade, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
You can go ahead, ma'am, if you're ready to give your comments.
I wasn't speaking, but
Okay.
if you can come back around to me, maybe, yeah, because I'm in the middle of something.
Sure, no problem. Did you say Ms. Linda is on?
I don't know if any of them were going to speak or if
Okay.
they were just here to
Okay,
kind of
that's
get an
fine.
update.
And,
Okay.
and also, it is, of course, at the pleasure of the chair, but if we do the briefing and people may, want to be more inclined to make comments afterwards, you might wish to give an opportunity at that time. I'm happy to move forward with the briefing if you'd like.
Okay, so thanks y'all for being online, and if you have comments later, just let me know, okay?
I want to say something.
Okay, go ahead. Please identify yourself.
My name's Linda Hernandez Padilla.
Okay, Ms. Hernandez-Padilla, please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to comment on, I know that they're trying to come up with all the residents that live there when all the Storm Uri and everything happened. And like we're still struggling with well, I'm no longer struggling, but I know all the residents there are still struggling with repair issues because they're not repairing anything. I think that we should be compensated for everything that we've gone through. And I know they're trying to get it all done. And I know they started the emails and the robot calls and everything. And I've been trying to talk to some of my neighbors, some of them who said they've never been got an email or a robot, but I told them how to get a hold of Liz or Basta in order for them to get compensated also. I also dropped out of the steering committee because I no longer live in Rosemont. I'm proud to say I moved out, and moving forward, I purchased me a home now. So I'm a homeowner. And so I guess the best thing that came out of this is now, I own my own home and not able to, not going to get sick there living there. But I still want them to, all the residents to be compensated for everything that everybody's going through and to get repairs done also, because they're not repairing anything. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for your advocacy on the steering committee, and congratulations on your new home. Do any of the other ladies want to add anything, or should we move forward with the briefing? Okay, and did you have any comments? So next up we have a discussion item, number 3 on our agenda, and it's a briefing on the Rosemont Tenant Investment Program and an associated budget amendment that I believe we will consider when we have a full quorum. Thank you, Liz, for being here. Or would you like to?
Correct, yes. So Diana Gray, Executive Director of Strategic Housing Finance Corporation of Travis County. I'll be doing the briefing today. CDR is here to help answer any questions. And really the purpose today, I think, is to give an overview of the process to date, of some preliminary staff recommendations as this takes shape, that are influenced by much of the research that CDR has done, which we'll go into a little bit, and to give also the board some sense of what their various choices, what kind of budget impact that might have. Because as we move forward to solidifying a plan, there will be multiple items that the board would need to approve, both a general policy, a budget amendment, potentially some contracts. So no vote, of course, even if we had the full board meeting today, which was canceled. We had not contemplated a vote on the item today. We wanted to make sure there was time for the board to think about it, for tenants to hear, and to provide feedback. But do anticipate moving this forward over the next, the upcoming board meetings and bringing items for action for the board. Next slide. So I'm going to briefly talk about the background. Many of you here know sort of the history much better than I do of Rosemont, but we do want to give the context of how we got here. We'll talk a bit more in detail about what has happened this year, really in the last now 7 months of work. The core policy considerations that we believe are in front of the board, which impact the budget decision. And then some issues that still need to be resolved really before we're ready to, I think, finalize a proposal to the board and then lay out some of our next steps. So in terms of background, of course, Winter Storm Uri hit in February of 2021 with significant damages to Rosemont. SHFC had owned the property for less than 2 years at that point. It was purchased in 2019. Feedback from tenants has indicated there were some repair needs that were already existing at the time. And so after the storm began a long process of repairs, some relocation, significant frustration on the part of the tenants, which sort of culminated in particular after some notices to vacate were issued in July of 2021, excuse me, with VASTA becoming involved in the property, supporting the organization of the tenants, and I think some direct communication with the tenants and the board, as well as other parts of the community about those frustrations. Importantly, one of the things that came out of that process was that in October of 2021, the Travis County Commissioners Court, who appoints strategics board members and can amend our bylaws, did so and added 2 tenant representative seats to our board. The first 2 tenant representatives were appointed in January of 2022, and over the next almost year and a half, an additional 4 appointments were made. So there's significant turnover on the board. And as of February of this year, our board consists entirely of members who were not on the board when the storm occurred in that first year or so of a process. And so I do want to just, I think, acknowledge that this is a board, some of whom were not there, have still been very committed to seeing this through and being responsive to the tenants' needs. There was a sale of Rosemont, of course, that the process started in October of 2022, and the actual sale occurred in April of 2023. There were net sales proceeds to Strategic of $4.2 million, but that's after a loss of about $8 million on the property overall. So 2 things I think are relevant at this stage. One is that there was an agreement with the buyer that if there were households who wanted to voluntarily move out at that time, they would be offered $15,000 to do so. So that was part of an agreement between SHFC and the buyer. And then also, the board discussed what to do with the $4.2 million in proceeds that were in hand. That conversation continued throughout November 2023. Was not a formal decision made, but just to contextualize our discussion today, it was framed around $1.2 million of the $4 million being utilized for some additional tenant support, and the balance, or $3 million, being utilized to reinvest in affordable housing in SHFC's portfolio since we had sold 280 units and no longer had those to offer to the community. So 2024 has been a year of significant transition for SHFC In January, we began the process in earnest of spinning off from our former, really sister organization, the Housing Authority of Travis County, who was managing the day-to-day operations of SHFC previously. And I came on board in January of 2024 as interim executive director, later becoming permanent. So at that time, when really sort of the board refocused on this as a priority for this year, in February, an ad hoc committee of the board was created with 3 board members to really focus on fleshing out what our actions might be in this area. In March of 2024, we appreciate having received some formal input from the neighbors at Rosemont, supported by BASTA, on what they thought both the population might look like that could be served and potential support, the amount of support that could go to those households. Understanding that we had limited capacity to really dig into this and understand a sort of who had been living at Rosemont, but also think through the process. In April, we engaged CVR, who had previously been done work, some of the relocation work on the property, to work with us in looking at the existing records to understand what our target population might be, identify some policy options for us, and begin to sort of develop a contact list for tenants, former tenants, I should say, people who were tenants during SHFC's ownership, knowing that many of them may have moved on. So we briefed the board on our early progress in June of 24, and then have recently received some more concrete analysis and policy options from CVR. They have also started tenant outreach utilizing phone numbers and email addresses on hand from previous rent rolls from BASTA's contacts, and they've been kind enough to share those with us. And so there's more work to be done there, but that has been started. So we want to talk about 3, I think, primary areas today. One are who are the eligible households that we would be considering for some additional assistance. The second is what is the maximum amount of assistance per household, and by association, what would the total budget be for SHFC of such an initiative? When we look at that, we're looking at a number of benchmarks. We're taking into consideration a number of, we want to share, I think, some of the things we considered in thinking about the maximum amount of assistance per household, and then we'll talk obviously about the total budget impact. We have some additional thoughts around implementation plan, and that's potential impacts on timeline. So the first question is, who might we be considering providing assistance to? For context, when we started this discussion earlier this year, sort of general consensus was maybe it was 150 households or so. And so when CVR began to dig into the available data, first of all, our primary data source here really are the Capstone rent rolls. Capstone was property manager from August 2021 until the time of the sale. And so we do have all of those rent rolls. However, there was a previous property management firm that was in place at the time of the storm and left the property about 3 or 4 months later. They have since then sold their property management arm, and so we have only one, at present, only one rent roll from February through July. We are continuing to look to see if we can identify those, but they have not been able to share those with us. BASTA, of course, also had contact information, so we're cross-referencing that. When we join all of those 3 available data sets together, we come up with a total of 259 known households, so substantially higher than was initially thought. And we think that is likely because some people may have been there at the beginning, moved out quickly, or moved in and moved out quickly, and so weren't there for a long time, but they were there for some period from Winter Storm Uri through the sale of the property. So our overall known universe is 259. It could be higher because we lack some rent rolls from February, March, April, and then June, July of 21. CVR looked at this and you know, talked us through some potential options that we might consider in terms of how we define the eligible universe of households. The first sort of differentiation is just the timeline. Are we talking about from Uri through sale, or are we talking about from the notice to vacate to sale? And I think that staff's recommendation is that we really think there could have been people who left between Uri and the notice to vacate who had significant impacts, and that it, you know, it makes sense to include everyone from that time, acknowledging that we still have a data gap. And then the second question of population to potentially exclude was those people who I mentioned earlier who may have accepted the eventual buyer of Rosemont's offer of $15,000 for households that voluntarily moved out. Because it's a significant, and as you will see, it is likely more than what we are going to be able to offer. So it felt, in fairness, that those folks have already received some substantial assistance, and we may wish to focus on the rest of the population. We do not yet have that number. Best estimate at present is that it may have been around 20 households. So in terms of the preliminary staff recommendation, we believe that the program would cover all households who lived at Rosemont for any amount of time from Winter Storm Uri, which was February of 21, through sale of the property in April of 2023. We would, however, exclude those receiving $15,000 from the Rosemont buyer for voluntary move-out post-close, with the caveat that that is data that we still have to acquire. And so, you will see as we move forward that when we look at some of our projections of cost, we take into consideration the possibility that we might not be able to get that specific data, which could impact our budget and our program. Next slide, please. So one of the, I think, early questions, both of the sub-quorum, and I believe that was a topic of significant conversation by the neighbors at Rosemont, is whether there should be, we should try to titrate, if you will, vary the amount of assistance based on the individual experiences of varying households. And while we acknowledge that Rosemont tenant households were impacted differently by the storm and the conditions at Rosemont and relocation, et cetera, we, and I believe overall, the neighbors also came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to, A, quantify that. The data that we have doesn't really capture the individual experience, although we have some information on relocation and concessions, et cetera. And we know that the data sets that we have are A, incomplete, we're missing several months currently, and they are in some cases internally inconsistent as coming from property management. So staff's recommendation on this front is that we really believe that accurately determining the level of impact on individual households would be very subjective. It would likely significantly increase our timeline, and that we probably wouldn't be successful in really accurately identifying, you know, what the differing impacts would be. Because of that, we are generally suggesting that within the eligible household, we would not vary the maximum potential assistance by household, that we would be looking at one sort of maximum amount, and that way it is quite straightforward, you know, people know what is available. Next slide, please. Then, of course, when we start to talk about, okay, what might that dollar amount be per house that could be available per household, we immediately sort of move into the space of some policy trade-offs. Because the original amount that was contemplated by the board was 1.2 million, and because the number of households that we actually are looking at as eligible is significantly higher, we are looking at some options that drive that total dollar amount way up. And the trade-off here really is that the board has identified previously a desire to reinvest some of those funds in long-term affordable housing. And of course, we, to the degree we increase the budget here, we decrease it for the purposes of replacing units. And so, having said that, we do want to offer a few benchmarks that have come from various sources, from previous board discussion, from BASTA and the neighbors at Rosemont, and from CVR's work. So first of all, through 2023, around the time of the sale and after it, one of the options that was discussed at the board level was using a benchmark of sort of maximum rental assistance through some of the public programs, in particular the city's RED program, which was a COVID-era rental assistance program, where the maximum, in that program, the average rental assistance was $6,000 per household. In a later iteration of city rental assistance, they made it a maximum amount per household. The recommendations received from neighbors at Rosemont with the support of BASTA in March recommended $15,000 per household, with a potential reduction for households still living at Rosemont, acknowledging there had been some rental concessions, etc., of $12,000. I will say again, staff is currently recommending that we have within the eligible population a single maximum, but I did want to note that they offered those two amounts. And then when CVR looked at this, they also looked at HUD relocation standards. So sort of the typical maximum amount that would be offered to a family that was doing a long-term relocation. From 2021, actually through recently in 2024, but certainly all the way through 2023 when we sold the property, that standard was $7,200. It has recently been updated in the last couple of months to $9,700. The other option that they provided us was the board could also take a sort of budget forward approach, which is, look, how much would the board like to invest in this effort, and then we divide it equally among our understanding of eligible households. Next slide, please. So importantly, we want to look at what each of those options yields in terms of the total budget for direct assistance. And so you'll see the two numbers here is 239 is the current known households minus what we expect to be the number of households that took the 15,000 for move out. The 259 is acknowledging that we may not have that information. And I also want to note that because there are still some rent rolls missing, we think it's entirely feasible we may identify some additional households. For the purposes of the board's sort of thinking about this, I would recommend using the higher number, because that sort of gives us some, if we can get the list of households having accepted $15,000 with voluntary move out, but we may have some play in some additional households. So the board could, again, stick with the budget amount that they had discussed last year, which was 1.2 million, and that would result in an approximate per household amount of $4,633. And then, this really ranges using the City of Austin rent program rental assistance average of 6,000, puts us at about 1.5 million. The HUD relocation standards of 7,200 and 9,700 put us at close to 1.9 and 2.5 million respectively. And then the $15,000 that was submitted to us by our partners at Basto with the input of the neighbors at Rosemont would, on the high end, lead to about 3.9 million, which is almost the entire amount that we have set aside. I do want to note that one of the pieces we need to take into consideration is that there will likely be some administration costs of this program. We have, in this year's budget, some funds that are already set aside for the work that CVR has done to date, and have some funding available for their continued assistance, which is to say that piece need not come out of the 4.2 million. But if we need a third party to help us execute on this, and we may, for reasons I'll describe in a second, we need to take into consideration that there could be, anywhere from, 8 to 20%, I'm guessing. I would say, 10 to 12, 15% is not uncommon. So a wide variety of sort of, budgeting levels for the board's consideration. Next slide, please. So I want to summarize the preliminary staff recommendations at this time, and then there are a couple three of which we've already discussed, and one of which is slightly new. So again, all households that lived at Rosemont for any amount of time from February of 21 through the sale at April of 23, except for those receiving $15,000 for voluntary move-out post-close. Current staff recommendation is that we start with the $7,200 maximum amount per household. Taking into account the impacts of that maximum amount per household and the likely funds needed for a nonprofit administrator, we believe that we're probably looking at a budget amendment of between 2 and 2.2 million, which would leave $2 million for investment in future units. And then the other recommendations I think that we will be honing over the next coming weeks before we bring a formal proposal to the board is a question about how long we leave this open. So particularly if we're working with a third party who's helping us run the application, I think we want this application to be open long enough so that, we have time to find tenants who may be difficult to locate. People have ample time to apply, but we also want to do this and again, to do this efficiently and wrap up our efforts. So somewhere between 6 months and a year is our initial thought. And then currently staff recommendation is that after that application period closed, the board could then look at utilizing those funds at its discretion, but one of the ways the board has obviously thought about this previously is utilizing those for investment in future units. We do have a few remaining questions. Next slide, please. So the sort of implementation questions around how we do this and what the partner mix looks like. CVR, again, has already initiated tenant outreach and efforts at location because we know it's not just as easy as putting the word out. There's going to be some research needed and investigation of households that that we don't have contact information for anymore. They're prepared to assist us with that validation of tenancy. They're looking for other data sources that would help us both identify households and reach out to them. In the past couple of weeks, we have had questions arise in conversation with legal counsel about what our viable paths forward are under Chapter 394 of Texas Local Government Code, which is our enabling legislation. And the short version of this is that under the language in that code, it may be that the most feasible approach is for us to work with a partner nonprofit organization that we would make a grant to, and that they would then administer the funds. That does bring up some questions about what the form of assistance would be. I think largely the sub-quorum has discussed this as direct cash assistance. If we are going through a partner nonprofit and this is structured as more as a sort of housing assistance program, it may be that we need to identify third-party costs that we are covering on behalf of the households, et cetera. So that is a level of complexity that we had not anticipated and are now looking into to try to identify what our options are. We, of course, as we have said, have some information gaps, including early rent rolls, and the information on those households that may have received the $15,000 upon voluntary move out. We are poised to move forward with that information request. Had not done so really until we wanted to have board feedback about whether that's in fact the direction the board wants to go before we started asking for significant information from third parties. So next slide. So we certainly want to hear the board's, well, I should say, the committee members' thoughts today. We have also, as guests, board members who have, non-committee member board members who have joined today virtually. You know, over the next several board meetings, we would anticipate the board adopting a policy resolution. Either in that policy resolution or as a separate resolution, we would need a budget amendment. This is not budgeted, although we have the funding available. And depending on our implementation strategy, we may need to go through an RFP process, which staff would endeavor to make as, you know, as quick as possible and efficient. So those items will come before the board. On the implementation side, expect tenant outreach and location efforts to be ongoing, as well as information gathering. It's our assumption that staff would execute on a request for proposals or request for qualifications as appropriate, move forward to develop and execute those agreements. And then, of course, we have to get to the point of really developing the tenant-facing application, et cetera. How can we be as clear as possible? What does that process look like? So that people understand what it is that is being offered, should the board elect to do so, and what the process will look like. Again, then there would be some months of application period and an eventual closeout of the initiative. That concludes my briefing. Happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Wow, thank you so much. Do you have any questions to start? I have a question then. Have we envisioned a minimum amount per household? And if we have, might there be more funds than available? Because not every household of the 239 would get the 7,200. Right.
So I will say that for most of this year, we have been operating on the assumption that each household would get the same amount.
Okay.
I think where the potential differentiation comes in my view, is if, as we work with council to understand what we can do, if we are A, working with a partner, and B, if, because part of the concern is a direct cash transfer, whether that is something that we can do under our enabling legislation. So it may be, and it's, you know, it's fairly common, for example, in rental assistance programs, that an application is made and then payments to third parties are made on behalf of the tenant. So for, just as an example, a former Rosemont tenant, you know, approaches program, whether we're running it or a partner is, and says, okay, this is intended to help you with your housing affordability and stability, right? What that means is we could cover all or a portion of your rent for a certain amount of time, or, you know, say a portion of a down payment on a house, right? That we, hopefully we would be fairly liberal. I would anticipate that most households would be able to reach the maximum amount of assistance, right? Let's say it's the $6,000 was one of the options. That 3 months of rent, or, you know, or so there's some combination of eligible uses, even if we were paying it to a third party, they could get there. Where I think the uncertainty comes in is, just as an example, say a former tenant has now moved in with family and doesn't have rent, right? And so, you know, I think, and that if we have identified with our, you know, potential partners, here are a variety of ways that we think we could provide assistance for that support housing affordability and stability, but they don't have enough of them to reach that. That's where I think, you know, there's some concern, and I want to talk with, that's one of the items we want to explore more with council, is whether, again, we can simply make, you know, provide support in cash, or whether it needs to be a reimbursement, which I think will work for the vast majority of households, but we could have scenarios in which, you know, there was some difficulty.
Okay. My next question is, what is the message that we're putting out right now? What is it? What are we saying?
So to the residents right now, what we're saying is we're just compiling a directory of all the tenants that lived from February of 21 to April of 23rd. Please contact us, and then we have a dedicated hotline and a dedicated email when they can, where they can contact us and provide us with their email, their phone number, best address, and we're just updating. So
I see. Updating
and-
contact info.
And all we said was that SHFC is looking into this, and we will contact them in the future. But because we didn't have a lot of details, we wanted to stay away from details. But obviously, people call and just leave their phone number because they want to ask questions. So we have been engaging in some conversations, and all we tell them is like, look, we just want to have the best information for you, because once something is decided, you know, we will contact you and let you know how you go about accessing these funds.
Fantastic. So
We didn't
have you
mail
had
anything.
many people contact you, or?
Yes, I think it's about 47 right now, and we had a lot of undeliverable emails.
Of course.
And so what we're doing is cleaning up, because what we had were old emails and phone numbers. And we didn't do the robocall in Spanish, so we're looking into how to do it in Spanish. The letter we did, the email letter, we sent it in English and in Spanish.
Fantastic.
Because we think about 35 to 40% of the residents are just Spanish speakers, right? Would you say that's accurate? It could be
Yeah.
even higher, right?
No, I think it's like 45.
45, okay.
May I see a copy of the letter?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. And in fact, Mr. Hoffpower,
Yes.
would you be so kind as to send the PDF version of CVR's letter to tenants to Kevin? And in a moment, we'll bring it up if we can, but we'll share.
Great. Those are my questions for now. Did that bring up any more questions for you, or?
No.
I'm very curious what your opinion of everything is.
We do have,
I'd like to speak.
Okay. Whoever has your hand raised, please identify yourself and tell us what you think.
Hello, my name is Brenda Ochoa, and I'm a tenant at Rosemont. I just have a question. I wanted to see what would be the timeline, because I know you guys are trying to gather all the information for all the tenants, and you're informing them to call in. So what would be the deadline to hear from them and get all the information to move forward?
so we have not set any deadline yet, Brenda. I think that, I mean, certainly we want to get it as soon as possible, because as we start, when we get to the point of distributing sort of this is the plan and opening the application, we want to have as many names and appropriate contact information as possible. Having said that, once that happens, once we open the application, staff is currently proposing that the application be open for several months. So I think, if we can urge people to reach out to CVR, we'd sure appreciate it, so that when we go live, we're able to communicate with folks.
And then I have a question too, because you guys, so the main focus is to deal with people that have been living there from the beginning, even before we got the letter, that actually went through, that suffered, it was just stressful through all the issues. So my opinion, and I think other people feel this way too, that I don't know, some of the board members are aware that before CFTC sold it, Code did close out for them to rent out the units until everything was prepared. But right before that happened, new people did move into units where people had to vacate and were victims of this. So I feel like those people that moved in right before the sale shouldn't be a part of this.
And Ms. Ochoa, do you have an opinion about how long before you would exclude people? When we say right before the sale, how long before the sale would you prefer?
For example, I'm not too aware of everybody, but I know when we had that group message, people were commenting like, oh, somebody moved. So I have a neighbor that right before Code closed, like the day before it closed, they actually moved in and then they closed. But someone else lived in that unit that actually got an eviction letter and moved. But these people moved right before Code completely shut them down. So I'm not too sure how many people did, but I know that some did bring it to our attention in our group chat that people were moving in, and we thought Code was going to close them, but we wanted to find out that they completely didn't shut them down until they finally gave us it was confirmed that they did. But there's some people that did move before the sale, and I think after, yeah. So some people did.
Okay.
When did Code completely shut things down? When did that happen?
Yeah, we don't have that date, but we can
Okay.
get that date
Okay.
from Code, because that was an important date to have.
I have it somewhere too. I can't remember
Yeah.
off the top of my head. As far as what Brenda's saying, so yes, like before Code stopped allowing them to like move people into empty units, they did move a couple of people in. But like right before, like they couldn't. They were moving people around, like from the apartments to the duplexes, from this duplex to the other duplex. So it seemed like there was more movement than there was, and like Code was able to verify this based on like utilities, right? Like that's how they find out if they moved people in, and so they checked, and it was people. They were like moving people within the apartment after that. But there were some that moved, like somebody moved into Lisa's house, which was like horribly filled with mold, and it was right before Code stopped it.
So wouldn't people who were moved in before Code said people should not be living here also be affected?
I think that's how we had been talking about it. Yeah.
Our current proposal does include those folks as eligible for assistance.
But Brenda is also talking about another subset of people who moved in right before the sale, right?
But what I think, like, because we did let Code know that like these new people are coming into this new apartment, and then when we looked into it, they had come from the apartments to the duplexes, or were in one duplex and moved to another. I'm not saying that like somebody didn't slip through the cracks, but I don't think it'll be like a huge number.
And right now, they are included in those 259. Because when we sorted the rent rolls, there are some people who were only there for the last month, of the sale, so they would be included. But you're right.
I mean, it's
they
possible
did.
that some did. I just don't feel like they would have had to be really sneaky to do it, because the apartments need utilities, right? And that's how they track it.
So, do we agree or do we disagree that people who moved in just a month before the sale are affected and impacted by
I'm saying
it?
that technically nobody moved in, technically.
I see. They had
is
been
what
moved
I'm
from
saying.
other places.
They moved from like within the complex to
I
another
get it.
unit.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it looked like they were new.
They were
I see.
shuffled, yeah. And I think Gabby is right in looking at that, because that's when we have people with two different unit numbers. So they were moved from one building to another.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can be confident that, I mean, we can be fairly confident
Yeah.
that even people who it looks like they might have moved in after all the bad stuff happened, like that's not necessarily true. They could have been there all along and were just moved around.
I think so. But I mean, it is possible that it was like their buddy and they found a way. Like, I don't know. I can't say 100% certainty.
Yeah, we can't
but-
say with 100%, but I would say that it's in the high 80 to 90%.
Yeah.
What you're saying is correct.
And I mean,
Yeah.
just speaking for myself, I would prefer to err on the side of more people getting the assistance than less. Is that how you look at it too?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just as bad all the way around, and it's just crazy, the stuff that happened. You know, you'll never see another Rosemont, hopefully. Never ever hope that.
Miss
door-
Brenda, did you have any other comments for us?
She's
No.
on mute.
Okay, how about Ms. Linda or Ms. Sade? How about Director Winnig? Do you have any questions or comments?
I think that Keisha can speak for the subquorum. We did meet on this last week. We could start there.
The subquorum of the tenant reinvestment,
Yeah.
did you want to share anything from your meeting last week?
I'm trying to think. I was on the phone. I couldn't get on the Zoom. I don't remember everything we talked about. Maybe Diana can.
No, that's
Maybe
fine.
go
I can speak to it. Can you guys hear me? I knew there was a volume problem.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so 2/3 of the subquorum on Rosemont, myself and Keisha, Director Prince, met last week, and we were able to see the preliminary version of these slides that have been presented to the Governance and Finance Committee today and the rest of the tenants. And we did come to a consensus with staff to support the staff proposal. So in short, I just wanted to make sure that gets out there, that we've been tracking this stuff with CVR for some time. And we definitely have a collective commitment to do the right thing here. Even though this is belated, we want to do whatever is within our capacity for the residents and to keep some set aside for the loss of permanently affordable housing, which was significant when Rosemont had to be sold to a private owner. And so we've been in step by step going through with CVR in their methodical and extremely hard work. I just want to acknowledge CVR for the hard work and the clarity they've brought to a very muddy situation. Just to map this landscape, which is very fluid, and to identify some benchmarks or precedents that could help us anchor our desire to do the right thing in some kind of prior effort in the housing, in the sector of affordable housing. So just want to say, with all that in mind and wanting to speak directly to the residents who have spoken today, as well as the resident directors who may be on the line, I hear you, we hear you, and while nothing can really undo what happened, we hope that we can provide some measure of support to you, and we're in this status right now where we're having to really review our legal options, but we have a commitment. So that being said, just to return to where I started, there was consensus in support of the staff position.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Director Winnig? Did, was there also consensus that the 1.2 million should go up to the 1.8 and change?
We did see the need for a potential budget amendment. Today's slide, which includes some costs for possible third-party administration, legal counsel, no doubt, and other varied costs, has bumped that up. So that we did not discuss. We discussed only the 1.8.
Okay,
It
but,
was 1.8 when we looked at it on Thursday.
but you were in favor of the 1.8?
Yes, yes, ma'am. The two of us that were present, and Keisha can certainly speak today if she can hear better because she was on the phone. So I don't mean to misproject if she didn't give consensus, but I believe we had 100% support for staff.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
See, I couldn't see all of this because I couldn't get on, so I was on the phone. So I heard the stuff, but it's not as good as seeing it.
So is the 1.2 already budgeted, or even if it were
Yeah.
just 1.2, that would be a budget amendment?
Correct,
Okay.
that's right. No matter what, we will need a budget amendment. And just as a bit of, we're gonna talk financials now. Last year, the financials, we'd always shown a portion of that 4.2 as sort of board designated, but the board had never taken a vote on it. So appropriately in our financial statements, it's just gonna show our net assets, right? So that, both the board designation of the total amount would require a vote, but that's optional for you. In order to do this, a simple, as basically probably line item budget amendment, new line item, new budget, that authorizes staff to move forward, make expenditures.
Well, I mean, I guess in case it's not obvious, I am also joining Keisha and Jan and thinking that this is the right way to go, so thank you so much.
Yes, excellent. So Director Reams also was having trouble joining, and I believe she is online now.
Good afternoon, Lisa. Did you want to give any comments on this?
You appear to still be on mute, Director Reams.
Yeah, my screen was frozen for a minute. No, I kind of agree with what was said.
And can we add you to the list of directors who are in favor of what the staff has recommended?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful, thank you. Is there anything else that we want to discuss about this?
Would you mind asking if anybody, I don't know if they have questions, because that was a lot.
Okay. Did Miss Brenda or Miss Linda or Miss Sade have any more questions?
There may have been a couple more people join at the same
Oh,
time.
or
Lisa.
anyone else who's on the line, if you have a question, just come off mute and go ahead with it. If you know, Gabby, of like an obvious question that someone might have, maybe you could put it out for them.
It's helpful if they
It's
can
not
weigh
a-
in.
I said, Director Wenig, there was a note in the chat asking if President Altamirano is able to weigh in, assuming he has a slightly improved connection than earlier.
I support the subquorum's support of the staff recommendation.
Fantastic.
Crystal clear also.
Crystal
Thank you.
clear.
I want to thank all of you and really recognize the work on a complex topic related to a very difficult experience of the subquorum, of the tenants who have remained engaged, BASTA, CVR, have really appreciated your help in getting this far. We still have a bit to iron out, but I want to be clear also that today is not your only opportunity for feedback. We, stand at the ready, whether that's through BASTA or CVR, I think is there to help explain kind of where we are to tenants at large. But feel free to, contact me as well. We, still have some work to do to refine the final proposal for the board. So continue to welcome your input.
Rough timeline of when the board might consider the budget amendment and whatever.
So I think that in August and or September, we very well might see some portion of this, right? Whether it is the overall budget amendment, which would say we intend to spend this much on, on this effort. We may come down with the final policy. I think the question about implementation is really where there's a bit more uncertainty as to timeline, because this really has just emerged in the last few days. Working with staff to think through, if we utilize a partner, what would that look like, and how we would likely want to continue to utilize CVR services in helping us identify and contact households. So I think that I expect there will be some action in August or September. Would be delighted if all of the necessary action took place in that time frame, but it may take us a little longer to nail down the finals.
And so just to give the tenants a rough estimate of when.
I think I would love to answer that question, but here's, I think, the value that we have been operating under. We're trying really hard to, once we're ready to pull the trigger, that we are able to offer some certainty and expectation. I am really concerned about, committing or sort of signaling something that we then can't deliver on. So again, it's my assumption that August, September, maybe October, we have board action. It would not be uncommon that it took 2 or 3 months, to get, if it's a nonprofit partner in place, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's sooner than October. And I would hope to have application, let's say our goal would be no later than December to have applications open.
I think that's
I just
fantastic.
gave more detail.
Yeah. If I had to guess before you said that, I would have said, I hope that we have applications by January 2025. So maybe before the holidays.
Share that
but,
desire.
Yeah. Anything else before we move off this agenda item?
I don't have a specific question, but I'm asking if people have questions and they're like, I'm trying to understand. So I think that there are questions. So
Okay.
I'm going to try to summarize what I understand of it, and then you all correct me, and hopefully that'll clarify for them. So the big takeaways are there's a much bigger number than we originally thought. And so right now you all are trying to find the right amount of compensation, and I think everybody's trying to get it around 7,000, but it's
That's our
still up
working
in the
number
air
right now, yes.
The other things with this is you may have to find an outside organization to kind of implement everything because of the way that you're structured and to comply with laws and all of that. And there was another big takeaway that I can't think of now. Oh, and then as far as eligibility, you're still kind of up in the air, but we're thinking people who are affected by Winter Storm Uri up to the suspension.
people who
Or who were there
Li-
before?
Yes, lived there at the time
Mhm.
of URI up to the suspension not the suspension, to the sale,
To the sale.
to the
Gotcha.
sale,
Okay.
for any amount of time. The only group right now that we are talking about excluding are those people who received the
15,000. And we don't have a clear number on that.
That is
either.
accurate.
Okay. And then the last thing is like, also timeline is kind of up in the air because there's still a lot of unknown things, but the goal is to have like a vote on it here soon, and then hopefully things starting late fall or fall. Maybe.
Winter.
Winter,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, this is, while we could have a meeting at which all of the votes took place, there are actually probably 2 or 3 things that the board will need to vote to approve, so you could see, 2 or 3 meetings at which we took some action on this.
Okay. Oh, and I remember the last thing that I think is also important. Whenever all of this gets worked out, there will be like a finite timeline, like it's not ongoing forever, which I think is really important. And that's
Yeah.
not, the amount of time isn't decided yet, but like we know.
Correct.
Okay. Anybody online, any other questions? Did I make it more confusing or?
If I could put my own gloss on it,
Mhm.
I think what staff has recommended is the broadest set of households possible. And I think the board, I think the 5 people that we had formally polled today from the board are all very much in favor of raising the maximum that we had thought we were setting aside, 1.2 million, up to 1.8 million, so that we can encompass that broader set of households, which could be as many as 259. It might be 239.
And I, myself, not even as Basta, because I feel like I need to talk to the tenants, but I think that this is like a really, really good and fair proposal.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'd like to talk to them to see if, I don't know if everyone's in agreement, but I personally think it's good.
And we'll update the tenants, which, I mean, most of them are here anyway,
Yeah.
but we'll update them on Friday. And can we provide this information
Mhm.
to
Yep.
the ones that are calling in?
It's public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
excellent.
we'll absolutely, we can share this, and again, this is, it gets a little technical.
Yeah.
And so, I think it was important to share this with the board first for their consideration, but, so they know that it's in, we have preliminary recommendation all over it, but happy to answer questions that they might have.
And you did a wonderful job, just synthesizing all of it and presenting it and
Great man.
And you made us look.
I know,
That was
it's
impressive.
fun.
Yes, impressive all the way around.
Yeah.
You helped me
Thank
understand it.
It's such a nurturing
So
group.
this is what we're doing. Finally, we figured it out.
So that's great. So y'all are going to meet with tenants on Friday.
We have a standing meeting and,
Wonderful.
it's just a short meeting because we're limited by Zoom.
And I'm getting questions from Spanish here, so I will call them because I feel like we need to break it down for them as well.
I mean, if you want me to participate in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Yes. So anyone else online want to throw anything else out before we move off this item? Going once, going twice. All right, I'm taking us to item 4 on our agenda, which is new and unfinished business. Does anyone have any issues of concern or that's really just you, Keisha. Do you have anything else you want to put on our agenda for the future?
Not right now.
Yeah, I don't
I
either.
think
So
we're pretty much full.
with that, I think we can adjourn. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you so much.
Great job, Rebecca.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah. It was not like this all this.
No, it was not
All this
it
harmony
was
here.
not a happy.